for a stop be put out in front of their house. I think most of you would say this will never happen, but that is exactly what the mandatory water connection bylaw is. The only difference is the type of goods being moved, people versus water. In the June 2019 progress report, point 6 states the residential growth is healthy. Well over 1,000 homes are going in, and this is growing the tax base. This is where the funds should come from to support the system, not the residents that have moved into a home in the private system at a later date to have a main installed and be expected to pay. Today is the day to make this right and stop putting unrequired burdens both mentally and financially on the residents. And since you haven't kicked me off the stage yet, I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. Essentially on the resident responsible for the physical installation. Since you haven't kicked me off the stage yet, I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. Essentially on the resident responsible for the physical installation. Since you haven't kicked me off the stage yet, I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. Essentially on the resident responsible for the physical installation. Since you haven't kicked me off the stage yet, I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. Essentially on the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution. Kick me off the stage yet. I'm going to refer to the bylaw 2014-255 itself, mandatory connection 2.01. On the resident responsible for the physical institution.
connection that you are here on the
fast forward up to 2014, there was a lot of systems. So through several review of that bylaw, staff fast forward up to 2014, there was a lot of systems. So through several review of that bylaw, staff fast forward up to 2014, there was a lot of systems. So through several review of that bylaw, staff fast forward up to 2014, there was a lot of systems. So through several review of that bylaw, staff fast forward up to 2014, there was a lot of systems. So through several review of that bylaw, staff fast forward up to 2014, there was a lot of systems. So through several review of that bylaw, staff fast forward up to 2014, there was a lot of systems. So through several review of that bylaw, staff fast forward up to 2014, there was a lot of systems. So through several review of that bylaw, staff fast forward up to 2014, there was a lot of systems. So through several review of that bylaw, staff fast forward up to 2014, there was a lot of systems. So through several review of that bylaw, staff fast forward up to 2014, there was a lot of systems. So through several review of that bylaw, staff fast forward up to 2014, there was a lot of systems. So through several review of that bylaw, staff fast forward up to 2014, there was a lot of systems. So through several review of that bylaw, staff fast forward up to 2014, there was a lot of systems. So through several review of that bylaw,
staff from Fast Exit 114 was through several with our bylaws. Staff from Fast Exit 114 was through several with our bylaws. Staff from Fast Exit 114 was through several with our bylaws. Staff from Fast Exit 114 was through several with our bylaws. Staff from Fast Exit 114 was through several with our bylaws. Staff from Fast Exit 114 was through several with our bylaws. Staff from Fast Exit 114 was through several.
Let me just step back a little bit here. Oh, so again, we've heard some bits about the cost and the benefits of, right? So without the contribution of these the other residents that are connected to the system or that would be connected under the mandatory connection bylaw, the remaining users would be subject to picking up those additional costs. In 2018, there was about $40,000. I think the annual cost, and I think it's coming forward here as well, is about $58,000 as identified in our in the report that's in front of council right now. So that's effectively where we, or how we are where we're at right now. So we went through several different phases, several different iterations to land us on the bylaw as standing right now. So the timing for the physical connection has been removed and is now subject to at the time of their infrastructure failure. So who's impacted? So it's not remote areas, it's not primarily farmlands or so on that's impacted. How we gather the list of, in accordance with the definitions identified within the bylaw, is we looked at municipal servicing boundaries as identified in secondary plans for Lindsay, Fenland, Bobcaygeon, Nomimi. And then within the smaller systems, there's a 2004 report that identifies kind of the servicing limits for those small systems. And within those systems, or all those systems, and we looked at what properties front in accordance with the definitions of the bylaw. So in Lindsay, there's 19 water, 1 sewer, and 10 have both services available to them within Lindsay. Again, if you go to Oakwood, there's 3. Birch Point water system, there's 3. So this kind of gives you the scale and how diverse and dispersed these properties are around the municipality that are subject to the definitions under the mandatory connection bylaw. There's the rest of the systems there. In Omimi, there's 21 on sewer, 2 have both. Saulnier has 2, and Southview has 2 as well. So totaling 134 properties that are currently subject to the mandatory connection bylaw. I will clarify that there was some confusion over the service running, or not service, the transmission main that runs from the Thornhill Reservoir in Lindsay to service Oakwood, and whether the properties along Highway 7 have been issued mandatory connection and are paying, and they're not. Those properties were not included within the mandatory connection process, because although there are residents along 7 that are connected at their choice, we as staff deem that to be a transmission main. So that transmission main from the reservoir to the Oakwood Reservoir, we have not included any of the properties along that section of road. So moving forward here, there's a couple of slides that are hard to read, and I'm going to go through them relatively quickly, but this is stemming from the 2014 Black Belt Review, where again we reviewed many different municipalities and how they've imposed and gone through mandatory connection. This is not a new process, and in fact we're one of the, if not the last municipality in the province to actually impose and go through a mandatory connection process. We looked at how the timelines were. So if you look at just the headings at the top, the time of the connection, the stipulated connection distance, decommissioning of old systems, was it required? Can the city enter into the private property to connect it, i.e. it's enabling us through the bylaws to enter onto property? What were the fines listed in the bylaw, or the limitations on fines, hardship clauses, loan programs, and others. So we went through a very extensive review in 2014.
and to end up with the bylaw that we ended up in, that was reviewed and ultimately passed by council to move forward. And again, we've made a couple of modifications to the bylaw since 2014 to soften and lessen the impact to residents as we move forward. I will go through a couple more slides here and then we'll kind of open up to the floor to questions. Benefits of mandatory connection. So again, it ensures long-term viability of water, wastewater infrastructure. So we have, as everybody knows, many multiple small systems that are difficult to operate and expensive. We need the users on those systems to sustain those systems. Again, ensures development with new services are connected to municipal infrastructure. So if the mandatory connection bylaw were to be rescinded, and I'll talk about that in a minute, that would be impactive there. It is in line with the 2014 provincial policy statement under planning for development, ensures residents are provided safe drinking water, and reinforces the city's strategic priority of a healthy environment and protecting water quality. So those are all reasons and benefits to maintain this bylaw. The benefits for residents in being connected to municipal water, wastewater services, properties adjacent to but are not connected systems are still benefiting service again. So there's, it depends how you look at this. I know there's some counter arguments to this, but there is increased property values for buildings and properties that are municipally serviced. Properties in areas that are fire rated receive reduced insurance premiums. Municipalities serviced through source protection legislation are less susceptible to for risk and contamination, drought, as well as interference from nearby developments. Reserve capacity for property to connect to at any time to municipal services. So again, there is a requirement for us to maintain and control a capacity of our systems by being part of the mandatory connection process. So they're guaranteed reserve capacity within those systems, and again, the safe drinking water source. So there's potential impacts, again, if the bylaw is rescinded. So again, the first one here is there's a loss of revenue from the fixed rate. So right now, on an annual basis, based on the 134 users, is about $58,000 a year in revenues generated towards maintaining our systems. What I want to clarify here as well is that residents are not paying for water. They're not paying for consumption of water. Residents are paying for the availability of water at their frontage and the cost of the infrastructure and cost of maintenance of that capital infrastructure that's been installed. So residents are not getting a consumption water bill. They're not getting billed for any portion of consumption at all. They are getting invoiced for the capital infrastructure that's in the ground in front of their property and our cost to maintain that infrastructure to their benefit and which they should be connected to. So that's one small piece that seems to be kind of thrown around there loosely. I want to reinforce that. So the inability, so again, potential impacts again continue on. The inability to force new development in service areas to connect. So we want all development within those growth areas to connect to our municipal infrastructure, and the bylaw is a tool that enables that. There is a potential to introduce transport pathways into source water protection vulnerable areas through people drilling wells and installing septic systems within those areas. Potentially impact the environment and the health of residents, and properties currently connected could opt to potentially even choose to disconnect from our systems, which again is something that would not benefit either the users of the system or the residents themselves in the long term. So that's where we're at with the system, how we got where we are, and I just want to open the floor if there's any questions related to that process.
Thanks, Brian. We'll get a motion to receive your presentation. We'll see if there's any questions. Councillor O'Reilly and Ashmore, are there any questions for Brian? Councillor Yeo?
I had a question on your, the impacts of the bylaw. And you said that new development may not, the inability to force new development in serviced areas to connect. Now that's more of a planning issue and site plan agreements and stuff where they would be forced in those agreements to connect. So I don't know how much of an inability the bylaw would have in that. Any new development is going to go through a site plan approval process, which will force them to hustle.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, any large-scale development that would require subdivision, site plan, and so on would go through a planning process. The development that we're talking here is development on existing residential lots or existing zoned lots where all they need is effectively a building permit. There would be no planning process to control which infrastructure they are connected to. So the bylaw enforces and requires them to connect to our infrastructure at this time where those processes would not be in place.
Okay, thank you for that. And there's, again, it's a building permit process, so it could be captured there as well, but point taken, thank you.
Councillor Helmsley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Thanks, Brian, for the presentation. My question, one of my questions was the same as Councillor Yo's, but I think one of the deputants today alluded to the fact that fire hydrants aren't used in firefighting. And I don't know if you can speak to that, or maybe I misunderstood the deputant.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. So within the fire-rated communities, right now, the fire-rated communities are Fenelon Falls, Bobcaygeon, and Lindsay. Fire hydrants are used for firefighting. There are some of the many of the smaller systems that don't have the capacity to provide fire rating for those systems, and they're handled in a different fashion. So when I referenced that during the presentation, I referenced in those communities where there is where they're fire rated. So that's
Okay.
the difference.
And I guess similar to that, in a way, we aren't requiring agricultural operations to hook up at any point?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to my knowledge, there are no agricultural operations within municipal servicing boundaries.
I was thinking of the Highway 7 corridor.
The Highway 7 corridor right now has not been part of it. The only property that was subject to it was the Sedor property in Fenelon along 121, and that property went through the standard processes that are already identified in the bylaw to review the feasibility, the impacts, and then council chose to exempt that property until such time as it redeveloped. So there's processes within the bylaw to deal with those one-off type properties, but as to my knowledge right now, there are no farmland that have been receiving invoices for water.
Okay. And the question of stops at every property that may be required to hook up. My understanding is that all properties don't have stops and would be required to then either go under the road, or they would be required to spend extra money to get to the water main or to the sewer. Is that correct?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, so the most traditional roads would have a sanitary sewer running along the center of the road and a water main on either side of the road, typically within the shoulder of the road. Sometimes that water main will run into further off the shoulder of the road into the boulevard. So every road and every property within a municipality either has a long side or a short side service. So I think that's what you're referring to. The lateral from the main and the road to the property line is the responsibility of the resident and ultimately becomes municipal infrastructure. So the municipality will own the infrastructure from the main to the property line, but its sole benefit is for that property that it services. So ultimately the responsibility of the installation and the cost of installation of that lateral is the resident's responsibility. So you're correct, there are maybe properties out of that 134 that would require a long side service. That's not uncommon in any other location or situation around the municipality as it stands right now.
So if we were reconstructing a road and putting in new water or sewer, would we put those laterals to the property line, or would we not do that and still expect people to hook up?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, Council, we have the capability through capital work. So if engineering was reconstructing a road, we have prices for reconstructing and relaying those laterals. Typically those laterals are replaced as infrastructure through a capital project. If there's no lateral there, the cost of the lateral, again, the initial installation is the cost of the resident. So we can work with the capital project to install the lateral on the resident's behalf under the cost of that capital project to save some money. We do not proactively go around and install all the laterals to the property line and the service lines and curb stops of the property for a water system due to the duration of time in which the connection happens. So if that connection doesn't happen for 15 or 20 years, we don't want that sanitary lateral sitting there collecting infiltration. We don't want that the water lateral sitting there with a potential leak at the end and corrosion, where to the point where we have to replace that infrastructure with no use anyways. But we can absolutely proactively, where we are reconstructing a road, work with residents to help save some of those costs, that initial installation costs.
I think engineering might have something to add, Doug, so go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So for every road reconstruction project, including water main replacement, we hold public meetings. So one of the purposes of those public meetings is to get an understanding of how the plumbing works to that individual unit. So there's two examples that often come up. One is it's a vacant lot. They have a vacant lot. They're in the process of either subdividing or through the planning process developing that vacant lot. We go to them and said, okay, we can install these laterals if they're an approved lot of record, but the cost for the lateral, both sanitary and water, are borne by the property owner. And then they provide us a check and we install it as per the tender. There is some reduction in cost because they don't have to pay for the restoration of the road because we're gonna tear up the road anyways, so there is some savings there. The other option is an existing homeowner and they're having issues with their curb stop, water stop, whatever it is. We will then repair that as part of our tender on the municipal side. On the private side, they would be responsible for their, from the curb stop or the property line to the residents. But we work with our contractor, but they bore the cost. A lot of water main projects, we have temporary water that we have to put bibs in, garden hoses. So we feed it through the garden hose. So we do an inspection of all the homes, and if they're missing a garden hose, which happens from time to time, we will then install a garden hose for them in order for us to provide temporary water. So we're in constant contact with the residents during a road reconstruction project.
Thank you. I guess finally, is there anything magic about using the fixed rate? I'm assuming the fixed rate is based on a capital cost replacement.
Yeah, so
But over what period of time?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the rationale for using the fixed rate is the cost of capital replacement and operational maintenance of that system to ensure that the mains are available with safe drinking water to that property. Again, there is a consumption component of the user rate system that they're not being charged at all for, obviously, because there's no actual consumption happening. So they are contributing to the infrastructure that is available to them, benefits from them, and through bylaw they should be connected to since 2005.
Would there be any rationale to, say, having a fixed rate of $50 a quarter as the rate for the mandatory hookup?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, I mean, just random number-wise, I mean, there's rationale and calculation to the fixed rate. It's supported too. If we wanted to start throwing different numbers, I guess that's something that we'd have to review with our revenue and taxation group.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to try and work my way through your bullet points up there. $58,000 a year. What's the impact on the current water users, the ones that actually use the water and have it hooked up, if in fact that was removed? Can you tell me on either a quarterly bill or a yearly bill how much more that would cost me, because I have water and I use water, how much more I'm going to suffer because of that loss of the $58,000?
Through the mayor, I don't have that exact information, but we could certainly calculate it. But keep in mind that the complaint we get from the residents today is that the fixed rates are too high. If we were to add that $58,000 to the existing residents, it would be again to the fixed rate, so it would be increasing that fixed component of the rate.
Oh, I get the complaints too. I probably get more complaints than what you do. So we don't know what an impact, no, because we mentioned an impact. One of the gentlemen that made a presentation said $3 and something. Would that be accurate?
I wouldn't want to hazard a guess on that.
Okay,
I'd rather do the calculation.
How many current water users do we have?
Looking to Lori up there, she's there. 14,000.
So if we divide $58,000 by 14,000, can you give me what that number would be?
No. Sorry, we're having a discussion here with council now. Do you need a few minutes? We'll move on to another question and come back.
If we do the 58,000 divided by the roughly 14,000 water users, it would be $4.14.
A year? A year?
A year.
A year.
So $1 a bill? Okay, all right, no, I just want to know what kind of impact, because I pay my water bill, and I want to make sure I get the lowest water bill I can. So it's going to cost me an extra buck every 3 months, or 33 cents a month. Okay, all right. Moving on to the next question. The inability to force new development in service areas to connect, resulting in an ineffective development. Can we not adjust the current bylaw to incorporate current existing units, remove those 134 people, and still force new development in service areas to connect, resulting in effective development? Could we not do that through the bylaw?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, the bylaw does force those residents to connect. That's the intent of the bylaw.
But could we
So
not?
this is if the bylaw was rescinded, i.e. if council chose to rescind and remove this bylaw, we'd no longer have the capability. So we can retain the capability of having new development connect, which the bylaw has.
And still give relief to
Council chose to add the cost to the bylaw, so that can be easily reversed out of the bylaw if council chose to do so.
Okay, all right. So by removing the existing landowners that choose not to, because I mean, it's the old expression, we could grandfather them in, that wouldn't actually have an impact on our ability to force new development.
Sorry, you've lost
I think what he's getting at is we can amend the bylaw to exempt the mandatory connection and still maintain a bylaw that forces new development, doesn't let people disconnect from the service. Without what you're saying there, that would happen if we rescinded the bylaw completely. But we could amend the bylaw. Is that where you're going, Councillor?
That's
we
right,
could
yeah.
make amendment to the bylaw, still keep that stuff in effect, but exempt the mandatory connection. That's
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, like council can choose to do whatever council wants to do. We can rewrite a bylaw to mandate that any newly developed property connect, and that all of the 134 people that are eligible for connection right now will be exempt from connecting. We can do whatever council chooses to do. Again, staff's recommendation is to continue on with the mandatory connection process based on what's happened all over the province.
Okay,
So-
all right, yeah. And I honestly don't want to be flip, but I've never bought into that argument. My mother, when I used to say all the other kids are doing it, she didn't buy into it either. So I don't buy into the argument everybody else is doing it, we should do it too.
There's a lot of other arguments too,
You know,
but that's fine.
and I recognize I'm being flip, and I do apologize for that. Okay, item number 5, properties currently connected could choose to disconnect. Once again, we could relieve people that are currently on the grandfathered list, or the ones that are currently there with their own water systems and their own septic tank systems. We could give them the relief they're requesting and still not allow people, through a restructuring of the bylaw, I recognize that, we can still keep the ones that are connected and make sure that they stay connected. One doesn't automatically take away.
Again,
the
through you, Mr.
Yes.
Mayor.
we
if
can amend the
council-
bylaw rather than rescinding it completely.
Yeah, so what I wanted to, I flipped back a couple slides here just to reinforce some of the reasons and rationale for the bylaw.
Well, that's good, because I want to get back to that screen too.
Perfect.
But first of all, I'd like to finish the screen we're working on.
All right.
Thank you. All right, now, the potential impact to the environment and health of residents. Now, when I read that, for me, that's a statement, okay? It either is or it isn't. If it is, if by not doing it, we're having a negative effect on the health of our residents, then we should be running lines and sewer lines to the remotest corners of the city because we're having an impact on the environment. So, and we choose not to do that. And we choose not to do that, obviously, because we can't afford it. So it's a financial statement. So I really have a hard time accepting that as an argument to do something when it's really the only thing we're putting money in is the city's pocket, as in opposed to. Now, I am confused with the introduction of potential transport pathways in source water protection vulnerable areas. I don't know what that means, so if you could sort of expand on that for me.
Sure. Again, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. The first statement there, the potential impacts to the environment and the health of residents. So again, if the bylaw is rescinded, there is potential for the septic systems to stay, for wells to remain. Although people have healthy, quality wells right now, wells are not permanent, wells are not infinite. They can get contamination into them. Municipal drinking water and the regulations around municipal drinking water is a far a greater quality control and is a safer ultimate product than a well. And I know people are going to argue that, but that's the state and the matter of the fact. So this is where we're trying to.
What my question is
Just put your microphone on if you would, please. Your microphone? That's okay.
what my question is that's potential.
It's a potential, correct.
Yeah, it's potential that could very well be dealt with at the time that it happens. So like when we did Oakwood, for example, Oakwood was already a city water system. And they had a quantity issue there.
Well, I understood Oakwood was private, and we extended the line out to Oakwood as a result of the issues that were happening there.
But the people there were already on the system, or on a system of some sort.
They were on private systems.
Okay, all right, okay, and then I do apologize because I understood it was a city system.
And this is kind of feeds into that, right?
Okay.
So those private systems had contamination, they had drinking water issues, so we were forced to bring municipal drinking water out there to alleviate the quality concerns that we're
But
having.
the residents there were already hooked up, is what I'm trying to get at.
Some are not. If you go back to those other slides, there's still a few that have not connected. So if you want to go back to the transport pathways.
And, yeah, okay, all right, go ahead.
Okay, so the transport pathways is under legislation for the source water protection. It's what effectively is anything that can contribute to contamination getting into a drinking water source. So a foundation, a well, a septic system, even municipal trenches for installation of utilities or private utilities are all transport pathways. So if you envision a source well where we are drilling a deep well adjacent to it for a private residence, that private residence has a spill, a leak, contamination can easily fall down through their well system, get into the source water, groundwater, or whatever happens to be there and impact those. So by eliminating the wells, by eliminating the septic systems within those servicing boundaries that do use surface water and or well water for source, you're eliminating those transport pathways.
Okay, well then I'm going to go back to my argument on number 2 then. Number 2, if that's a valid argument, if number 4 is a valid, if we're not going to do it for the potential impact in the environmental health, like these are nice words is what I'm trying to get at, and they're great words. And any well at any time, including a city well, can be contaminated, and I understand that. And if I dig my well too deep and my neighbor goes dry, I'm responsible for that, and a lawsuit will resolve that. But just to say, well, we want to do these 134, but we don't want to do anybody else because that's what we can't afford right now. So I have a hard time with those arguments as to why we should impact the 134 that don't have a problem and use the argument that there might be 68,000 that may have a problem. So anyway, if you want to go back to the other screen you were showing me, that would be great. Now this was all part, my understanding is, and the screen I'm looking for is the Black Belt program where they came up with this idea in the first place. Can you tell me when they came up with this idea, what other ideas they explored?
Came up with the
With the
mandatory
idea of
connection.
charging these 134 people
So,
Was that the only, was
No.
that their only way of reducing
So-
the cost?
That was a direction from council.
yeah, so through you.
No,
That was a
but it-
direction from council.
But, no, but it was as the result of a
No.
black belt
No, it was not.
study.
I can explain if you want, if you let me, Mr. Mayor. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. So the Black Belt project simply looked at ways to make the bylaw enforceable and to
Okay.
push residents that are eligible for connection based on the 2005 kind of criteria to connect. So that process looked at connection timelines, again, extended timelines from 6 months to 18 months, and it looked at the enforcement and the capability of connection. Then the pilot happened in Fenelon Falls based on the amended bylaw. Through that process of the 25 residents that we looked at in Fenelon for the pilot, council chose to exempt 22 of the 25 people, but as part of that process also chose to impose the mandatory connection, impose the fixed rate fees on those residents in lieu of having to immediately connect to the system. It was kind of we're going to give you additional relief from having to connect, but you're going to charge you the fixed rate cost because that's what you should be paying if you were to connect in accordance with that process.
Okay.
So that was a choice of council. And then based on that direction and based on a further resolution, staff were directed to bring back an amendment to the bylaw to impose that fee to the rest of the residents while we were continuing through the mandatory connection.
Okay, that's my mistake, and I apologize for that, but I misunderstood the way the statement came out.
Sure.
Okay, so I guess then my final question is, as far as the existing and potentially existing properties in the future, is there anything that besides $58,000 or $1 a month, or 33 cents a month, $1 a quarter, coming out of my pocket, because it comes out of my pocket, that relieving the current existing owners of property that aren't hooked up, is there any other negative impact if we exclude them from this bylaw and let them continue their life? Is there any negative impact that you can tell me from doing that except for the $58,000?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, based on a very high level, I'd want to do some more, consideration of what you're asking. But ultimately, if we were to take the 134 residents, still require them to connect at the time of the failure of their infrastructure, and then again start paying at that time, but to relieve the fixed rate payment at this time, I don't see any other immediate challenges other than, yes, you are transferring those costs on to the other 14,000 users that already complained about the rates being too high.
And they'll phone me, I'm sure.
Okay.
And I appreciate that. I don't know when you're ready for a motion, but when you are, just let me know.
We'll get to the report is next. This is just the presentation for questions. Good?
Thank you.
Councillor Riley?
Thanks very much, and Councillor Dunn has gone over a lot of the stuff that we want to talk about, but I think first of all, just to address some of the issues that were spoken to today, the gentleman spoke that we're comparing natural gas to other services. So first of all, natural gas isn't our service, but it is, we're not apples to apples. Education. Some of us, you gentlemen choose to have 7 children, that's wonderful. I chose not to have children, and I pay education tax. And, whatever, so there's all kinds of examples. I mean, good examples or different examples or relevant examples or not so relevant. So anyway, so as we go across, I think we should try and compare apples to apples. I think we inherited a lot of systems from previous municipalities. So we used the Oakwood example. Lindsay Fairgrounds needed water out there. So we took the pipe out there, but we didn't oversize it because they were paying for it out there. That's an example. Another, we have 21 water systems in our country. And as a result of Walkerton going down the road in the future, we don't know how or how expensive they're going to be. That's hypothetical at this point. But I think there's going to be many challenges coming along. We discussed it with OMIMI. We chose not to go there with water and sewer. But there's 21 other water systems. But there's so many complex issues. And even with the Lindsay Fairgrounds, for example, it was outside the boundary, but now it's very well within our boundaries. So, I mean, these have all changed as we've progressed as well. So I think we're all here looking for a solution. And I think, as the Councillor Dunn's already said, that we are transferring, our water rates are high. We all acknowledge that. I think we also acknowledge the fact that if these people decide, like living on a private road, it's like you decide where you want to locate. If these people are in a situation, we can either decide to have some relief or we're gonna ask the other people, the other 14,000 water users, to pick up the tab, basically is what we're asking. So I think that's where we have to decide to go as a council.
Thank you for the question. Councillor Ashmore, do you have any questions about the presentation?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just, I'll wrap it into one question through you to the Director. Just specifically to Omimi, I don't need to go back on the charts, but there's 21 of the 134 mandatory users that haven't hooked up. That translates into 15%, even though that's like 1% of the population of Kawartha Lakes, Omimi. Those people, especially, I'll give you an example, like Walnut Street, quite a few of them have not connected onto it because they felt that they were personally fine with having their own sulfur remover, their iron remover, and a UV bulb. They felt that it was a personal choice. So that's what, you know, a lot of people do think of it that way, as their personal choice. They don't want to drink the chlorine, they don't want to drink the fluoride in the water. That's their personal choice. But why does Omimi have such a high percentage of the total amount of, I don't call them non-users or mandatory connection users compared to their population, like especially in one street, but it's all over the village, but I'll just give you that as an example. Omimi has one village, but...
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I can explain Omimi. First of all, we don't add fluoride to any of our water. We disinfect the water. Chlorine is the primary chemical for use for disinfectant, and it is, again, but there is no fluoride added to water from a chemical perspective within municipal drinking water systems. If you go to Omimi specific, the streets of Hope and Walnut, back in 2012, there was a capital project to improve the wastewater systems, and at the time, council chose to add in and close in the gap of servicing within that community for wastewater. Those processes, or those residents, then were subject to the mandatory connection process. So there's been an extensive discussion, extensive communication with those residents about the impacts of and the capital allocation and charge related to them. That's currently being led through the Adam Founds group, or Dr. Founds group, in relation to that. So that process, and why there's a high concentration in Omimi, is because council chose to expand and extend the sewer system within Omimi at the time of that other capital project.
I'll just add the one more, thanks. You said that word, that's good. Capital allocation charge, that was the one I was looking for. Capital allocation charge. So those people, maybe this isn't your area, but so that's to do with, who can those people deal with? I mean, they have this charge on their taxes, most of them.
So I don't know the status of that, and through you, Mr. Mayor, there is a capital component of the infrastructure that the residents are responsible for paying for. No different than if you have a new subdivision, the developer pays for all the infrastructure going into the ground there. So in this particular case, it was existing residents, but the council chose to put a new sewer in the ground. So the residents are responsible for a capital component of that infrastructure, and then they're also responsible for the lateral to the property line in connection to their home. So there are cost components of that that are there. I'm not 100% sure that charge has actually been imposed and put on the residents yet. To my knowledge, it has not been, but I may be mistaken.
So just my final question, so it's a flat fee, is it for every place in Kawartha Lakes, like whether it's Omimi or Highway 36 and Lindsay, is it a flat fee that they pay, 300 and?
So for the standard resident that doesn't have the capital charge, which is separate from the capital, like the main infrastructure, they all pay a standard fixed rate that's identified in the bylaw. So the residents, and those 21 residents will be paying the fixed rate, but they would not have received their, to my knowledge, the capital component of the infrastructure that they would be responsible for as of yet.
That's fine.
Okay, any further questions? We have a motion to receive. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. We'll move down to, well, it should be the next regular council meeting, but Councillor Dunn, you had somewhere you wanted to go with this report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move that this report be received and that all references to mandatory hookups as they relate to existing properties that are not currently on existing properties be stricken from the bylaw. And if I get a seconder, I'll get into the talking about it.
Can you, did you get that? Maybe just say it again, we didn't get it, so.
That the report be received and all references in the current bylaw as they refer to existing properties be stricken from the bylaw. And they can make whatever adjustments they need to capture the new developments and the properties that are already currently hooked up. They can make those adjustments. But
Those are existing properties, that's my concern.
okay, so what I'm talking about is properties that, prior to this bylaw, were not hooked up to water and sewer, or water or sewer, I guess, not be required to be hooked up to water or sewer.
Suggestions for I'll just see if we can clarify the wording so we're all on the same page. Go ahead, Brian.
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, just trying to understand, I guess, the question. Are you looking to have the 134 properties that are currently subject to the bylaw removed from any requirement to connect whatsoever, or just from the paying the fees and then they still are subject to the bylaw at the time of the failure of their existing infrastructure? What are you looking for? Just trying to understand, and we can help you with the wording.
I think the appropriate thing is just to strictly remove them from the bylaw, period. Don't require them to hook up, so that in a year from now or 2 years from now, we're not dealing with the same issue again. If it's wrong to do it now, it'll be equally wrong to do it 2 or 3 years from now. And by removing them from those requirements, as we extend our water systems, we have 134 now. In 2 or 3 years, we may have 260. I don't know. I have no idea what our water plans are as far as our lines go. But this may not be the end of it, what I'm suggesting. And I've got some examples right here in Lindsay that survived 50 years without being hooked up. And so what I'm saying is, if they're not hooked up now, if they're living on a well and a sewer now, leave them alone to live on their well and their septic tank. If at some time they choose to pay the cost, then that's fine. They can make application through the whatever channel, probably through engineering, to get hooked up. But the ones that aren't affected right now by our water and sewer shouldn't be forced to be. So that's where I'm trying to go.
So,
Yeah.
again, through you, Mr. Mayor, so that is going to lead to a number of challenges, right? So you're concerned about the numbers and the increasing numbers. There's no plans for, that I'm aware of, about expansion of the sewer and expansion of the water systems. That typically would happen through development or through other planned initiatives where they're going to be mandatorily connected anyways. Staff would, if council chose to, I think it would be reasonable to remove the fee component for them, but I still strongly encourage for the other, in relation to the other reasons and rationale supported in the presentation about the healthy environment and the alignment with the provincial policy statement and the other things, to have those people at the time of failure of their infrastructure to continue to connect to the municipal infrastructure. That's just my 2 cents, but again, I understand where the council's trying to get to.
How about we ask staff to come back with some options for relief from the mandatory connection bylaw, up into including complete exemption, and that, I think, will cover what I might be interested in hearing, that, maybe we waive the fixed costs, but when their system fails, they're obligated to connect, whether that's 20 years down the road, but they're not paying anything up until that point. I would just like to see those options in something that would come back to the bylaw, and then we can make a decision on how far we want to go at that time.
If they
Would
can
you be open
present,
to that?
if they can present that position in option 1, in a format of option 1, option 2, option 3.
Up to and including complete exemption from the mandatory connect portion. You okay with that?
I'm fine with that.
I think that will give us some options back. Do you want to? Yep.
So yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I just want to make sure that it's clear that part of it is the mandatory connect bylaw itself, but council also has planning policies that are explicit in the official plan that require in certain urban centers servicing. So they are required to be there. So if there was an elimination of the mandatory bylaw as it relates to those areas, it would actually be counter to other policy. And that's really what was maybe not clear in the provincial policy statement, but you are required as a council to require servicing and identify it within certain areas. So you certainly have flexibility on how you charge when you transition that in, but you would not be able to, in my opinion, be able to exempt fully and completely existing lots of record or future potential development within those urban service boundaries.
Yeah, and that's not what I'm talking about, Mr. Mayor. What I'm talking about is, I got a house on 36 Highway, and I've got a great well, and I've got a 2-year-old septic tank system, and I just don't want your water, thank you very much. And I've got a house there. I'm not talking about lots there. If I've got a lot there and I haven't built on my lot yet and I'm going through planning, then I'm sorry, you're too late. I have no issues with those at all. What I'm strictly talking about is, and I haven't got a seconder, but I'm going to give you a quick example anyway.
You do, Councillor Yule, a second.
Okay, all right. So right across the road from the Ross Memorial Hospital, beside the old OPP station, I can't think of her name now. Now she was eventually forced to hook up with the northwest trunk. That house was there for 50 some odd years that I'm aware of. Never hooked up to water, never hooked up to sewer, and she was quite content with that. And and that was right here in the town of Lindsay. When we get back to the arguments about taxes, when I first joined council in the 90s. For Lindsay Town Council, 40% of the water bill was paid by taxes. And the council of that day said, that's not right. We shouldn't have it on the tax bill. We should have it, the user should pay. And we went from a tax-supported water structure to a user-supported water structure. So that's what we did then, but the lady across the road from the hospital, she never got scooped up in that. So all I want to do is I want to protect the people that currently have houses and waters and septic systems from being pushed down this road. And if we can have options to show us how I can get there, I'm happy.
Okay, I think we've got a fairly good idea. Councillor Yeo, you seconded it. Do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, I do. I was about to pull my second before you brought that up, because I do strongly believe we have to keep in the hookup when the system fails, and I'd even add in something to the bylaw that says if the property itself is redeveloped, that it should be hooked up. But I agree with Pat Dunn. On the other side, I don't think we should be charging these people. So I'd like to see the options, and that's why my second is still there.
Thank you. Any further comments, questions? I can't, sir. We're just dealing with it down here on the floor. Sorry. No, we've already had our deputations. Any further questions from the council? Seeing none, everybody's clear on the motion? Kathy, do you have clarity on the motion?
Sure.
Put your microphone on, please.
So that report, WWW 2019-010, review of mandatory connection bylaw 2014-255 be received, and that staff bring back multiple options up to including rescinding the mandatory connection bylaw.
Up to and including the existing users, however that wording needs to be. The 134 existing users up unto exempting them. Options up unto exempting the existing 134 users on the system.
Okay.
Not repealing the whole mandatory connection bylaw. So options. Okay? Okay, so let's get it. Okay? Is there more?
When?
Yeah.
When?
Let's get a date. When would you like that back? September? Is September realistic, Director? End of third quarter, September. You're good with that? And we also need on there that this recommendation be brought forward to the next council meeting, which will be this afternoon, for consideration to ratify that decision. Are we okay with that? First and seconder, everybody's good? Okay, we'll call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Okay, we'll move down to our next presentation, which is item 6.2, which is the high water bill adjustment policy presentation from Ms. Jennifer Stover, who's our Director of Corporate Services. Just give her a minute to pull up the presentation. Go ahead. I was waiting for you.
I was waiting for you. At the request of council, we're just providing an overview on what the high bill adjustment policy, what it currently states, some of the challenges we're having with it, what we've processed today under that policy, and then some opportunities that you may want to consider in updating this policy. So the high bill adjustment policy was approved by council in April of 2017. The policy was really established to set the expectations of council as it related to high bill inquiries. So I think there was a number of high water bill inquiries that were coming straight to council. The policy was developed to try and put some authority on staff to be able to deal with those. And it's just important to note that the policy defines a high bill as being 2 times or greater the normal consumption for that same period in the previous year. So we bill quarterly. If your bill was more than 2 times this quarter than the previous quarter, you would be able to apply under this policy. The policy deals with a number of things. A reading error, which is simply when we're reading the meter at the home and putting it into the system, that there's a disconnect there. We apply refunds under that scenario. A period of increased consumption, that's relating to individuals who perhaps have a pool and fill their pool in the summer. The water is definitely higher. The policy talks about how that's not covered under this policy. An estimated bill that's higher than actual consumption. So if we estimate your bill, we estimate it incorrectly and you're owed a refund, you would be able to get a refund under this policy. A catch-up bill is the opposite. If we underestimate and your actual is higher, you have to pay it. Final meter reading from a replaced water meter. Again, if there's a disconnect between what the meter is saying in the house versus outside, you need to pay for that. Obvious or hidden leaks, which is under Section 8 of the policy, is the one that we tend to have people coming to the committee to talk about, and that's an area of concern. Malfunctioning water meters, installation of new water meters or mismatching of registers and water meters are also covered under the policy. That seems to be handled appropriately. We're not having any concerns. And then the final section, which is Section 12, is the unexplained sudden large increases. So the 2 areas that are highlighted are really the areas of concern within the policy that we want to talk about today. As far as adjustments go, the policy was put in place again in 2017. We've at the staff level have used the policy to refund 59 customers for a total of $34,000. 52 of those were residential properties, 5 were multi-res, and 2 of them fell under the commercial industrial properties. So that's almost 60 properties over the 2.5 roughly years that we've had the policy in place. The High Water Bill Committee is anyone who didn't fall within the policy and wanted to go before the committee, had the opportunity to do so. We established that committee in 2018, And to date, we've had 12 properties come forward and ask for a reduction through that committee. 3 of those have been approved by this council or previous council, and total relief through the committee process has been roughly $3,600. We've had 1 property that was residential, 1 non-res, and 1 commercial industrial. So the 2 sections of the policy that tend to be providing us with some concern and are the issues that are going to the High Water Bill Committee relate primarily to Section 8, which is obvious or hidden leaks. And so this section's relating to individuals that have concerns with dripping taps, water softeners, their toilets running, they've got an ice maker that's malfunctioning, water-powered sump pumps. It's those sorts of things that are causing their water bill to be high, and they're coming forward to the committee. The policy currently states that it only applies to residential properties, and that's what we're seeing come through to the committee is individuals who are something other than residential that are looking for that relief. The policy currently states that the property owner must locate and initiate repairs within 30 days and provide documentation to us of those repairs. So they can't just come forward and say, my toilet was leaking and I had it fixed. They actually have to provide evidence that they bought a new toilet, they had a plumber come in, things of that nature. And the policy currently states that we'll give them a refund of 50% of the amount that was above average consumption. So we assume that whatever water they historically use on a quarterly basis, they used in that period. Whatever the gap is, 50% of that we refund them, the 50% the homeowner is responsible for. In Section 12 of the policy, which is unexplained sudden large increases, this really is just, we don't know what happened, but they got a large bill. And so it talks about the fact that the increased consumption can't be explained. We can't attribute it to anything. It wasn't a leaky toilet or a water softener. But there are some criteria that the high water couldn't have resulted as an act or omission of the customer, that the occupant of the property or person within the customer or occupant's control, the leak or other defect is a result of private plumbing systems, things of that nature. And we also make sure that the water meter has been tested to be seen as accurate. So this is really, we've done all our due diligence, we can't figure it out. The bylaw points to the Director of Public Work as having the ultimate say in whether the water is deemed to be unexplained. The credit would then be that 50% over and above normal consumption, similar to Section 8. The other section of the policy that we may want to consider is Section 14, which identifies the maximums and minimums. So currently, the minimum adjustment has to be more than $50 for us to process the refund, and we've had that situation come before the committee. There's no adjustment cap for residential customers, and for not-for-profits and institutional customers, it's capped at $5,000. So we may want to reconsider those caps. So really what staff have looked at, and in hearing some of the concerns that have come before the committee, some suggested revisions that we would offer under the obvious or hidden leaks is to make the adjustments in any circumstance that is beyond the property owner's control. So not a leaky toilet, not a water softener, but if something's happened that they couldn't control, infrastructure's burst underground, things of that nature. Somebody's in the hospital and something happened at their home and there was nobody to look after it. There's various scenarios that we would consider that was beyond the customer's control. Those would be situations where we would consider applying a credit. We would consider opening the policy up to all property types, regardless of whether you're a business or a resident. We would still want that notification period of 30 days, just so that it's not dragging on for too long, and that the maximum adjustment period be limited to 1 billing cycle, so that, again, if a problem's persisting for many billing cycles, we're at least limiting it to that. The unexplained sudden large increase, we would suggest that if we're going to amend Section 8, as I just described, that this section could be removed entirely. And then the adjustment cap, because there's minimums and maximums and they're different, again, we would suggest that perhaps a better option would be to just limit the adjustment to all property types with a maximum of $1,500. And I guess the other important point to make is the current policy limits it one time per property, so we would want to ensure that that stayed within the policy. So that's my quick presentation, if there's any questions.
Thank you. I'll get a motion to receive, please. Councillor Richardson and O'Reilly. Questions? Councillor O'Reilly?
Okay, just a question, I didn't see it in it, it came up the last time we were discussing the water bills, and I think Councillor Dunn and I were discussing around a commercial property, if there was a fire or something, and we weren't sure if it went on for 3 or 4 days and there was a water bill. Would we have any way of getting proof if the owner could justify that he didn't get loss of a business insurance? Would we have any way of coming to the city? You're asking for requirements. Could that be a requirement that they would come and prove that they didn't get covered through insurance? I guess would be my question.
Through the mayor, we certainly could include that in the policy.
It's just a suggestion. I don't know what the committee council feels about it, but yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you. Further questions? We have a motion to receive. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. So we have a policy in front of us. I'm just going to put it out there. I had talked to our Director of Corporate Services about the policy. Can I suggest that some of the revisions suggested in slide 10 and 11 be brought forward to council for consideration and amending that policy? I think with what we talked about in there covers a lot of what we've talked about. I like the cap. I like opening it up to all the different groups. But I also think we need to put the emphasis on some of the users, that it's their responsibility if they have a leaky toilet. But things that are beyond their control, we should be offering relief. And then anything over and above that cap can come to council. If it's a one-off, can come to council. So if you're okay with suggested revisions to the policy from slide 10 and 11 be brought forward for council's consideration, and by September again, third quarter, is that okay? All right, you'll move that, Councillor Dunn. You'll second that, Councillor O'Reilly. Do you want to speak to it, or pretty straightforward?
No, it's got everything that I was looking for.
Okay. So I guess we need that the policy review be received first, and those revisions be brought forward to council by the end of September for council consideration, and that this recommendation be brought forward to the next council meeting in 3 hours for councils for consideration. That's the motion on the floor. You guys are good with that? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Okay, and our last presentation is Mr. Brian Robinson again, which is seasonal level of service policy presentation. Director of Public Works, you're up, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Council again. I just wanted to take the opportunity here to bring forward the seasonal level of service policy. Wait for the presentation to come up here and we can follow along. A couple things before we really get started into the presentation. I just want to reinforce with council that the seasonal level of service policy and what we're going to be talking about today here applies only to unassumed roads. And I'm going to provide definition of what an unassumed road is within the presentation. But an unassumed road is effectively a road that the municipality owns but has no legal obligation for maintenance on that road. We haven't assumed it as a municipal road. There are other roads out there, the private roads that are not owned by the municipality, and this policy does not cover those private roads. So, as of right now, direction from council is to maintain status quo service on private roads where we had agreements, and where we were maintaining private roads without our prior knowledge to continue that work as well, and staff have been directed in that way. So the seasonal level service council policy, again, council's asked to have a brief overview on this, so I'm going to run through this as quick as I can. So what is it? The policy, in essence, council has chosen to direct staff to provide limited seasonal service, which is non-winter service to qualifying unassumed roads. So part of the policy states that we will provide grading and gravel application as deemed necessary by the supervisor, but no winter service to be provided to those roads. So right now, there are only 2 roads that have lost winter control services at direction of council, Those are Folsom Crescent and Mink Alley. There was a specific resolution when this bylaw was passed, when this policy was passed, that those roads be notified that services is ceasing at the end of this year. So they were given a 2-year grace period, and it's happened. Every other road that has been receiving service in the past is continuing to receive service. Definitions as promised. Unassumed road is a right-of-way property owned by the municipality where the city is not legally required to provide service. Private road, again, is a road that is owned by one or more private landowners. And again, the seasonal level of service policy we're talking about here today only applies to unassumed roads. I just want to reinforce this legal opinion again. 2009, the city received a legal opinion on limited service agreements. That legal opinion from Staples and Swain states that the city is not legally obligated to provide maintenance on either category of road, private or unassumed, and not doing so limits both maintenance costs and exposure to liability to the city. So municipalities across the province have taken that same stance and have chosen not to provide any service to private or unassumed roads. City of Kawartha Lakes is a bit of an anomaly in that front. So how did we get here? Historically, many unassumed roads have received varying levels of service. Some have received occasional grading only. Some of them have received winter only. Some of them have received a combination of both. Residents have grown to appreciate and expect the level of service from the city. So from amalgamation through to adoption of the policy in an effort to control the program as it's kind of been morphing and growing, staff decided to enter into legal agreements with those associations where services were being provided. That was known as the LSA, or Limited Service Agreement process. So council, through the core service review, directed staff to review that process. So we commenced that review in 2015 and effectively very quickly realized that we needed a large database of our road network, which we did not have. So that database is ever growing and continuing to expand and will likely be several years in the works before that database is complete. That database includes assumed roads, unassumed roads, and private roads. It's effectively every road segment in the city, and we're currently over 4,400 road segments for the city. So we're trying to establish ownership, maintenance, accountability, responsibility, historical practices, and really have a rounded knowledge base for our roads. So that's continuing ongoing for several years. So specific to unassumed roads, through the core service review, there were multiple reports to council through that process. Ultimately, was back and forth. Council adopted policy 2017-001, which is a seasonal level service policy for unassumed roads. That policy again identifies that we're providing spring, summer, fall grading only, annual gravel application as deemed necessary by the supervisor, and clarifies that no winter services are to be provided on unassumed roads that fall within that policy. And again, I mentioned there that winter service was canceled for Mink Alley and Folsom Crescent via resolution of council. So what are we doing now? Roads that were previously within the LSA program have been grandfathered into the seasonal level service policy. So whether they were under the LSA agreement or whether on the policy, there's criteria. The documents both outline criteria: minimum road widths, minimum clearances, minimum turnaround radiuses for equipment to get in and out. The expectation is that those associations are maintaining roads to that standard so that we can fit and maintain and provide that service to them. So we complete those annual inspections, and where those inspections fail, we're reaching out to those associations saying you need to undertake improvements. When the improvements are done, service will resume. New roads that are unassumed, that want to become part of the seasonal level of service policy, submit an application. Again, we go out, we do an inspection on the road. If they fail to meet standard, the association is advised they need to undertake upgrades, and then they will start to receive service. And then they will just follow into that routine process. And that is working very well. We've received several applications and are going through process on new roads, new unassumed roads. Not new unassumed roads, but new roads new to the policy. This is the piece that is still sitting in limbo, and I think is a bit of a gray area for council. What are we doing? So unassumed roads that have received historical service in lieu of the agreement or policy are receiving status quo. So again, where there's an unassumed road that had been receiving some winter service, some summer service, some whatever, we're not changing any of that right now. That is staying status quo for those roads and those associations. And we're documenting all that work within our database, which we will bring forward to council again in a couple of years, hopefully, fingers crossed, to help council understand what work is being done outside of policy, what work is being done within policy, and really get direction or seek direction from council on how they want to handle that. Do we want to impose the policy and stop winter control? Do we want to grandfather those roads in permanently, or how do we want to handle that? So just to give council some kind of economy of scale, right now for unassumed roads only, there's a lot more private that adds that 135 kilometers, but there's 135 kilometers of unassumed roads in varying condition within the city that we're actually providing maintenance to. Sorry, that we're not providing maintenance. In total, there's 135 kilometers of roads. Currently, we're providing about 59 kilometers, service to about 59 kilometers of roads. So if we were to expand it, there's a significant increase in work required for those other roads. So we're trying to manage that aspect of it as well. But as we said, the process is working very, very well for staff. And I don't think we're receiving very many negative comments with respect to the policy and the practices. And ultimately, that's where we're at with that policy.
Thank you. We get a motion to receive. Councillor Yeo and Elmsley. Councillor Yeo, you had a question?
The only question I have now, and believe me, I was confused about the whole process from 3 years ago, and I'm glad we got that straightened out. Now, I was not the counselor back then for Folsom Crescent and Mink Alley. I can't recall why they were specifically pointed out not to get the winter service they historically got. And so my question is, now that I am their counselor, why were they pointed out? I can't recall.
Yeah, so it's a fair question. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. Ultimately, when we did the review, there was a list of roads that we had limited service agreements on. So we went through that entire list of roads. Folsom Crescent, Mink Alley, and Antiquary Road were the only roads that were receiving winter control services through the agreement. So by removing the agreement and making the flat determination through the policy that winter control services were not going to be provided to those roads, council made a specific resolution to remove winter control from Mink Alley and Folsom Crescent so that they would align with the rest of the roads through that policy. So that's, council chose to remove winter control on those two roads. Antiquary Road is another kind of specialty because Antiquary Road is a hard surface unassumed road. It actually has a surface treatment on it. So council said that you're not receiving the grading and the gravel application, but you should still then offer them a service of receiving winter control. So there's a specific resolution to Antiquary Road to provide winter service to that road as well.
Just quick follow-up. It seems, when I look at it now, and it really seems unfair to those two roads who had an agreement and they weren't able to be grandfathered in because they had an agreement. So I might extract this afternoon. But.
Well, you don't need to extract it this afternoon. You can try and make an adjustment when we get to the report if you choose to do so.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
Which would be a recommendation to council this afternoon. So just a question then. So the seasonal level of service agreements that we have on, say, 59 kilometers?
So there are no more agreements. The agreements were all canceled and were all replaced with the council policy. The council policy dictates the service on those unassumed roads. We still have agreements in place for private roads.
Gotcha. No, the seasonal level of service that we offer on unassumed roads, none of those roads get winter control.
As of right now, the ones that are that we've qualified under the policy and that grandfathered in, none of them are getting winter control. There are unassumed roads that are getting winter control. They were roads that prior did not have agreement. So they were roads that were just handshake agreements back in the day, always done and provided. There's many of those out there as well, and that's the essential piece of getting the database completed so that we can understand which roads are unassumed, which roads have been assumed by service, and then we can clean the entire database up and then have an accurate listing moving forward.
The roads that had an LSA back when that was the agreement, most of them didn't. There was a seasonal level of service, so most of them didn't receive winter control. But we have unassumed roads that never had an agreement that traditionally, historically, have been getting winter control.
That is correct. There are some roads out there that didn't receive any summer service whatsoever, an unassumed road, and the only time we ever touched the road, the unassumed road, was for winter control. So that's continuing status quo for now. Again, recognizing that council policy says that it shouldn't be, but we're not going to make any of those changes until we can come forward to council with all of those, all that information, and we can get some accurate direction.
Yeah, so we're basically status quo with the seasonal level of service. The rest of them are still getting their service until we have that full inventory and all the information comes back.
That is the intent.
Great, thanks. Councillor Elmsley, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Several. Thanks, Brian, for the presentation. Couple of points. In your presentation, you talked about getting a legal opinion. And I believe it says you got a legal opinion from Staples and Swain. Would you say that, or perhaps Ms. Carlson would like to answer the question, that Staples and Swain are experts on roads, or are they more expert in city governance and property issues?
Perhaps I'll speak more to the question itself. What I think the question is do I agree with that? And I had reviewed that. It's a pretty easy answer. The assumption itself, the legal assumption that itself is our liability. So I would agree that where we have assumed legally a road, we have an obligation to maintain it. So that's aside from any political considerations. But I have been working with Public Works on a case-by-case basis with the facts presented to me from various roads to deal with whether or not certain roads may or may not have been assumed as a legal matter. So I have been working on that.
Thank you for that. I believe that the acknowledged experts on roads and all of this history would be Russell Christie, who I believe even judges take a copy of Russell on Roads into the courtroom when they are going to adjudicate something that has to do with roads. And I know that we have used Russell Christie in the past, and I'm wondering why, when we were talking about roads and unassumed roads and private roads and other things, we wouldn't have gone to Russell Christie for an opinion on what we were doing and why we chose to go to Staples Swain.
I would say more accurately that the city staff used internal resources when we had historically used Russell Christie, which is admittedly the drafter of the book that is the Bible in the area. We didn't have internal counsel, and we do now, and I'm able to provide opinions, and I have on this matter.
Thank you. I may come back to that later, but through you to the Director of Public Works, you say that the status quo on unassumed roads for winter control and other control is being maintained, but I have a road in my area that has had service for more than 100 years. It was at one time an assumed road and then became an unassumed road. And they traditionally got 2 gradings a year, plus gravel, plus snow removal, and they've now been told that they will get no more service. So I'm just curious as to why that anomaly may have occurred.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not 100% sure which road you're referring to, but that's something, Doug, that we can absolutely refer back to, because my comments before about maintaining that service is there. I'm not sure how a road is assumed and becomes unassumed without bylaw of council. Now, the only way to assume a road is through bylaw of council or through full and complete maintenance prior to 2003. So we can look at that road specific and determine what's going on for sure.
The assumption goes back to the 40s and 50s, and then the unassumption occurred sometime around that time as well. So I don't know what the norm was for that period of time, and whether it was outside the then municipal boundaries, so it was changed.
Can you guys investigate that on your own, and if need be, come back? We're trying to talk about the whole policy here.
Yeah, I have, it is in my memo this afternoon, of course. It is one of the roads mentioned. I'm fine, I guess, with those questions and what has been asked so far on unassumed roads. I do think, as a rule, that if we have a road that we have historically been maintaining and we have been providing service on for decades and decades and decades, that by removing that service, we are, in essence, reducing the level of service to those residents, and I don't think it's correct. I'm not suggesting we take on any more, but I am suggesting that the ones we've been doing, we need to continue to do. Thank you.
But just for clarification, despite the one road you're talking about, that's where we are right now, correct? With the level of service and the roads that are receiving that, whether it's grading or winter control, are getting it until that full inventory of roads comes back and we can make an informed decision.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. So that is the direction to staff right now, is to maintain status quo. Where we may get into challenges is where we do the inspection and those roads fail to meet the minimum standards. So we will follow the policy in that case, which may mean we stop service until the road is improved to the point where the policy comes back into place. So that's the only real way that services are going to be ceased now, is where they fail to meet the requirements of the policy for the seasonal level of service.
And we work with the associations. When that happens, they're notified that their level of service is going to change unless they bring the road back up to speed. And
that is
correct.
Correct.
When they're not happy about it, they come to council, and here we are.
That is correct.
Perfect. Thanks. Okay, so we have a motion to receive the presentation. Any more questions? All in favor? That's passed. We have the report, seasonal level of service policy review be received. Did you want to make a motion, Councillor Yeo?
Yeah, if I could, to receive the report, and that Folsom Crescent and Mink retain their snow plowing privileges until such time as the full report comes back on the road ownership issue. And I believe that'll probably take 2/3 vote to rescind.
No, I don't think so. No, I think we're fine. And that this recommendation be brought forward to the next council meeting for consideration. You have that, Madam Clerk? We will. You get a seconder? Councillor Elmsley, you'll second that? Do you want to speak to it, or?
Just briefly, back in 2016 when this all started, and like I say, I wasn't the councillor, but I am now, and these people are like, we always had it, and they were victims of having it done the right way. And so they lost it because they had a contract, whereas other roads that didn't even have a contract will retain it. So I think it's only fair to continue for a couple more years until the full report comes back. And the plow's down there. These guys aren't going out of their way to do it. It's right off a municipal road, so I hope you'll support me and support those folks. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elmsley, you want to speak to it? No? Any further questions? Councillor Ashmore?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question to, over there. I'll just put it out here. Like, there was, I think a couple of meetings ago, we gave a list to the director about some of the limited service agreement roads that we had questions about and whether they could be eligible for, well, they're called a different name now, but they're a different name. But for example, in Kennedy Bay, Elder Street, it had at the very end of it, it had a limited service agreement, but now it's not there anymore. So these are individual
This is
cases.
the motion that if it makes sense for the city to maintain a service at council unit. Do you have an update on that, Director?
I don't have an immediate update on it. The direction is still to bring a report back in Q3 on that, subject to the discussion that happened today.
So they're still in the pipe to come back. It's not part of this agreement. Separate resolution.
Okay.
All right?
Yep.
Any further questions? Call the question, all in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Those are our reports. We have no closed session. We just need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Yeo and Dunn, all in favor? That's passed. We'll see you back here at 1 o'clock.